Free your mind.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Cult Free Radio. I'm your host, Mad Sweeney, and I am so glad to be back from summer vacation for the 7th Cult Free Radio show. We have quite a few announcements this evening before we get to our topics, so let's get right back into it. First, a reminder that Cult Free Radio is on Facebook. If you search Cult Free Radio, you'll find us. Please like us. Feel free to friend me, Mad Sweeney, and you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on with the Cult Free Radio show. The second announcement is another reminder that Cult Free Radio can be downloaded as an MP3 podcast at exjehovahswitnesses.com. That's www.ex-jw.com. And I'll type that up in the social stream when I get my hands free here in a minute. The first 6 Cult Free Radio shows are up there at xjw.com, and tonight's show, I'll get it up there as soon as I can edit and convert the video from Ustream into a MP3 audio. The next announcement is that Cult Free Radio can now also be seen and heard on YouTube. Now this requires a bit more editing because sometimes the site is cool with that Free Your Mind musical intro, and sometimes they decide to block the video. So sometimes I put it up, it's blocked, and I need to edit it out and try it without the music. But I kind of like the music, so I always give it a shot with the music first. Also, I need to chop the show into less than 10-minute segments and post them up one at a time and make them into a playlist and stuff. So I guess the long story short about this is it may not be up within the next few days on YouTube, but don't panic. It'll get up there eventually. And so far the first 4 shows are up, and I am going to do them consecutively, so expect shows 5 and 6 before this show on YouTube, which is show 7. And I guess I should share with you how to find it on YouTube. I guess you could search Cult Free Radio. Also, my channel is Mad Sweeney 1914, and that's all together one word, MADSWEENEY 1914. Search that, you can find my channel, and you can find the playlist for each of the Cult Free Radio shows that are up there so far. Another bit of news is relating to the impending court case against the Watchtower in Australia. I've tried to contact Mr. Unthanked to try to see if he was interested in coming on the show, and I'm getting no response at all. No refusal, no confirmation, nothing. So we'll have to wait and see what he puts on his website after Tuesday, which is supposed to be the day his case has its next court appearance. It may not be a big deal day. It may be one of those show up and schedule more things for the future, but we'll see what he puts on his website. I would think he would want some more exposure for his cause, but maybe he really only wants to keep everything in-house on his own blog. But we'll see. I'm running that down if I can. On the Menlo Park case, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement since early summer, aside from there's been some barbs thrown back and forth between the defense attorney and the plaintiffs in the court documents. But one piece of news can be found at xjw.com's latest article on the topic, and I won't spoil the surprise other than to say it's typical Borg Watchtower behavior when it comes to lawsuits. So check it out later when you have a few minutes. Go on to xjw.com, read the latest on Menlo Park, and download some Cult Free Radio for your iPod while you're at it. Now, perhaps the most important thing to mention tonight is that tomorrow is September 11th, 2011. It's the 10-year anniversary of the World Trade Center attacks, and that really changed the country, and it changed the world we live in. It brought radical extremists to the forefront of the news, and it really changed our world. 10 years later, thousands more have died on foreign soil, and while certain cult members may not mourn the dead, I think it's appropriate we give those who died on 9/11 and during the 10 years since a moment of silence. Thank you. Now, tonight is part one of a two-part series that Cult Free Radio wants to focus primarily on the topic of the challenges of leaving a cult without destroying your marriage or your family. And it can be done. It has been done. And we have some really good interviews lined up to discuss how it's managed to work out for some people, including myself and my wife. But before we get into that topic tonight, I'd like to address briefly the current issue of the Watchtower that's being studied at the meetings this month. Right now, they're in the July 15, 2011 Kool-Aid edition, the study edition of the Watchtower magazine. Now, the manipulation is really heavy in these study articles, and more relevant to this audience is the fact that they're bound to have an effect on those of us who have left the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses, because the articles use heavy doses of behavior, thought, and emotion control to keep anti-cult information out of the hands of the victims who need it most. The first study article was studied last week on Sunday and was entitled, "Will You Follow Jehovah's Loving Guidance?" And the subheadings of that article were as follows: Do not follow after the crowd. Do not follow your hearts and eyes. Do not follow unrealities. Now, all of these are sort of paraphrases of scriptural quotes, but you'll notice they all start with the do not follow, and in this week's article also has 3 subheadings with 3 do not follows. So basically what you've got here is 2 articles putting together a sort of 6 commandments of the Watchtower. Thou shalt not follow after the crowd. And just in brief summary, the gist of that first subheading, do not follow after the crowd, is that other people are wrong, the Borg is right. The Watchtower is truth, everybody else is false. And throughout the article, they credit Jehovah with giving these warnings, but really they're twisting cherry-picked scriptures, like they do, that don't even have in the Bible any sort of modern-day application. And the language they use is in order to set up an us versus them dichotomy in which everything about us, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower, is godly and loving, and everything about them, the world outside of the Watchtower, is satanic and evil. And some of the examples are, for instance, in the picture, it's funny, there's a picture with the subtitle or the caption, "Are you ever tempted to follow the crowd?" And it shows a bunch of people in line to go to what looks like a pretty cool movie called The Evil Sky. And it shows some, obviously, from the way they're dressed, Jehovah's Witnesses going to a movie that I think is called Running Duma. It's hard to tell in the picture, but anyhow, it shows just a handful of people going to this clean movie about a cheetah or a leopard or some African cat, and everybody else following the crowd. So it's really just showing we're different, we have to be unique, don't follow what anybody else says. And the article points out that it's all, everything else that's not from the Watchtower is from Satan and Satan's world. So, can't be trusted. Don't listen to it. Don't follow it. The next subheading, do not follow your hearts and eyes. It's the same thing, Although not only can't you trust any other people, you can't even trust yourself. It's that same doctrine that was on display at the district convention this past summer. And this subheading also sets up the us versus them, which is very, very kind of a signature characteristic of cults. If you've read Combating Cult Mind Control and other literature educating people about cults, you'll know that us versus them is an identifying mark of cults. And so it sets up the good, the us, who don't even look at things our religious leaders don't want us to look at, and it calls the other people good for nothing. The people who actually examine the things around them, including information that can be contrary to their indoctrinated beliefs, the people who would be willing to study and research are good for nothing people. So, interesting. Third subheading in last week's article, do not follow unrealities. And this is really fairly twisted because what they call an unreality are things, material things, like your money, your job, your house, the things you own. Those are considered not real things. They're called satanic illusions in the article, while Jehovah God is described as our friend and our guide who's more real than those things that we need to survive on a daily basis, like money to buy food, clothing, and shelter. So apparently, to Jehovah's Witnesses, your stuff, your money, your job is not real. God is. Anybody starting to think that maybe this is a cult? Well, it just gets worse this week. This week's study article, which most congregations will be studying tomorrow, is called, Will You Heed Jehovah's Clear Warnings? Even from the title, they do the same thing they did in the previous article, is present this information not as coming from a publishing corporation in Brooklyn, but as information coming from Jehovah God himself. And not only that, but these warnings that they twist and convolute and somehow Jehovah's Witnesses wrap their minds around them are called clear warnings. So the subheadings from this one are, do not follow false teachers. The next subheading is, where'd it go? Okay, anyways. Yes, do not follow false stories and do not follow Satan. We'll get to all three of them, but let's start with the first one. Do not follow false teachers. And you'll notice they're continuing with the theme of thou shalt not follow. So, thou shalt not follow false teachers. And according to the article, a false teacher is someone like you or I, who have left the Watchtower organization and now believe something other than their cult propaganda. Now, what's particularly ridiculous is that the scriptures they use clearly show that apostates the Bible is warning about are in the congregation, not people who have left, not people who are outside, people who are in the congregation. But no matter to the Watchtower, they're well accustomed to telling the sheep what the Bible means, and the sheep are well accustomed to ignoring what the Bible actually says. So here are some of the words that this article uses to describe people like you and me. Not content, ravenous wolves, leading them away from truth, cunning, corruptive, smugglers, clandestine, like clever forgers, having fabricated views, false arguments, deceptive teachings, twisting the scriptures. That's a good one coming from the Watchtower bunch, twisting the scriptures. Wow. Not having others' best interests at heart. False teachers, infected with a contagious, deadly disease, and mentally diseased, dried up wells that deceive and disappoint. This is all within one subheading talking about one group of people, that's people like us, who have left the organization. And one of the key identifying marks of a dangerous cult, as I've mentioned earlier, is when a group works really hard to develop an us versus them attitude within their members, separating them from the outside world. And primarily, they do this by fear, which is a form of emotion control, and they also do it by thought control. And it seems pretty obvious from the magazine's description of us that they're trying to convince their members to think of us in these terms, and in thinking of us in these terms, it develops fear. Fear of even talking to us, fear of what we might tell them, fear of the things that we say and do. So, it establishes the thought that whatever we say is untrue and with evil intent against them personally, and so they're indoctrinated to disbelieve anything we say, and this part's the key, without ever even hearing us. And just to make sure, any curious ones among Jehovah's Witnesses don't even think of considering the information that you and I have to share with them, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower organization, has given a simple two-word command to the flock about us: avoid them. That's it. Do not follow false teachers is the name of the subheading, and they summarize this command: avoid them. Now, rather than address any of the things that we claim on Cult Free Radio, anything that's claimed and established in the dozens of books about the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses, anything on the hundreds of websites across the internet, the thousands of YouTube videos people have made about the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses, rather than address those specific allegations and say, see, here is exactly what they're claiming about us, and here is evidence that they're wrong. No. They don't have the courage to even allow their followers to face just one of these so-called false teachings and hold it up to examine in the light of truth and supporting evidence. No, it's simply avoid them. An ad hominem attack on the messengers with no regard whatsoever for the content of the message. But the question should arise in any thinking Jehovah's Witnesses mind: how do I know who and what to avoid if I haven't heard anything they're saying yet? How do I determine who is teaching falsehoods if I ignore huge pieces of available information? Well, the Watchtower is pretty crafty, and they don't address or even acknowledge this question on purpose. Because really indoctrinated witnesses, not knowing which websites to avoid and which ones are maybe okay, not knowing which YouTubes to avoid and which ones might be okay, not knowing what Facebook friends or groups are to be avoided and which ones might be okay, they'll just decide to avoid all information that's not from the cult itself. The true faithful will restrict their reading to Watchtower organization materials and never even have the opportunity to stumble across Cult Free Radio or xjw.com or Inside the Watchtower or Tim Kilgore's YouTubes or any source of information that could help them escape from the cult. It's sad, and it's a powerful indoctrination technique that takes advantage of thought, emotion, and behavior control in order to control the information that members have access to. And for the most part, it seems to work. But on the plus side, there are bound to be a few individuals who do think for themselves and think rightly, this sounds like they're hiding something. Why the cover-up? If they have the truth, why fear facing false teachings and showing them where they're wrong? Well, those are the people who I feel there's hope for. Because I think many of us, you and I, were probably much like those people. We thought, let's look up some information about this. And so, because there are people out there who are bound to be seeking information, let's not give up in providing it. It's important to realize that the unlikelihood that we can get through to fully indoctrinated cult members, it's also important to realize and understand that there are some out there who are always seeking. And so even if they're only seeking to prove themselves and the witness is right, at least they're seeking and they've opened the door to conversation. And if they're willing to ignore this counsel, this command to avoid us and engage us in some sort of conversation, that tells me that there's still hope for them. Now, the other two subheadings in this Watchtower that they're going to be studying tomorrow continue with the modern day version of thou shalt not and are entitled Do Not Follow False Stories and Do Not Follow Satan. Now, they define false stories as, quote, frivolous questions that lead to pointless research. And they credit these false stories, which are frivolous questions that lead to pointless research, to the same boogeyman they credit everything with, Satan. And once again, the focus is on scaring people into behavior that will prevent them from obtaining information that works against the cult's interests. And the counsel remains emphatic and unambiguous: do not pay attention to false stories. Now, of course, they don't address how or why these stories are false, or how research and discovering new information could ever be considered pointless. They just hit the stories with a similar attack to the one they used with the apostates, demonizing them as a, quote, distorted view of God's standards and satanic lies. And of course, the final subheading, Do Not Follow Satan, sums up the two articles like this. And this is really what it boils down to. If you're not busy serving the Watchtower's interests fully and pretty much all the time, then you are both wasting your time and leaving yourself open for Satan to attack you. So, we've got these two articles with 6 emphatic do not follow, thou shalt not laws for Jehovah's Witnesses, designed to control the behavior of the members and the information they have access to by establishing an us versus them dichotomy between themselves and the rest of the world, which they portray as truth versus falsehood. Well, this is thought control, and it's instilling fear of worldly people, fear of people's own intuition and instincts, fear of having too successful of a career, fear of people like you and I, fear of books, fear of TV shows, movies, websites, and videos that contradict what the cult portrays as truth, and fear of the ringleader of all this scary stuff, the big, bad, invisible guy, Satan the devil. So, Jehovah's Witnesses are fully victims of cult mind control, because their thoughts are programmed to believe anything that's not in full agreement with the Watchtower is false. No investigation, no looking at evidence. Oh, it disagrees with the Watchtower? It's false. Period. Thought control. Their emotions are programmed to fear anything and anyone not in full agreement with the Watchtower. We're called, people like us that are listening to this show, and like me who's speaking on cult-free radio, ravenous wolves. We're out to get them. We're out to ruin their relationship with God. We're called all sorts of things that I mentioned earlier. Deceptive teachings, having fabricated views, not having their best interests at heart, all of that stuff so that they are afraid of us. That's emotion control of fear. And their behaviors are programmed to avoid anything and anyone not in full agreement with the Watchtower, and therefore that's behavior control. So now, with the thought control, the emotion control, and the behavior control in force, the only information they have access to is information that is in full agreement with the Watchtower. Now, here's a rhetorical question for everyone listening to think about. Just what is it that the Watchtower leaders are afraid of? And if they're so afraid of it that they dedicate entire series of magazine articles to it, does that make their fear legitimate? Just maybe we're making some headway. And I think we are making some headway. Some proof that we are making some headway is the fact that even though sometimes, and in fact fairly often, we see people on message boards and recovery groups who have lost their spouse because of leaving the Watchtower, or who are still in a marriage with a cult member, but the relationship is strained and all the respect is gone, we also see many couples and families who have escaped the clutches of the organization together. And I'd like to start on this two-part series by jumping right into the first interview without too much preliminary commentary, because the people really speak for themselves. 2 weeks from now, on the next Cult Free Radio show, we'll follow up on the interview you're about to hear by laying out a step-by-step strategy that those who are on their way out can use to help their spouses and their family members in recognizing that the Watchtower is misleading its members and that it is indeed a dangerous cult. And following that, we'll air another interview with a couple who left the organization together successfully. And I think I'll probably also share my own personal experience on the issue as well. So that's how this topic of leaving a cult, specifically the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower, with your marriage and family intact, that's the schedule. That's how it's going to be laid out. So now, without any further ado, we have an interview here with a couple from the United States who has successfully left the organization together. They are faders, which means they are not yet disfellowshipped and have no interest in being disfellowshipped. They have no interest in following any sort of Watchtower procedure by presenting a disassociation letter. They've basically just faded and gone into hiding. And since that's the case, we're going to use their jehovahswitness.net usernames. We have tonight Reopened Mind and her husband, who goes by the handle Totally ADD, and they'll both perhaps explain a bit about their usernames, their current situation, and how they managed to leave together. So let's give a listen. Welcome to Cult Free Radio, Reopened Mind and Totally ADD. My first question this evening will be for Reopened Mind. How long were you a Jehovah's Witness? Were you born or raised in the organization, or did you convert at a later age?
I converted as a teenager. I started studying the Truth Book when I was about 14 years old, and I wasn't baptized, though, until I was 20, which was in 1973. And it took me a long time because my parents opposed me studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. They had some issues with the religion. I had never heard of it before. And I studied with two witness girls at school. And because my parents opposed, sometimes I could go to the meetings, sometimes I couldn't. We studied at school. When I was old enough to have a car, I would drive to their house and have my studies there. And I could make some meetings, and then I even made some assemblies, but yeah.
Okay. And how about you, Totally ADD? Were you born, raised in, or did you convert?
I was born in. That's all I've ever known. My parents were baptized a year before I was born. Both, my father especially, was very fanatical about the religion. He was agnostic before that. And the thing that got him going with the organization was the fact they didn't teach hellfire. He always thought it was a sham. And when he learned that what they were saying, well, he was gung-ho for it. And he really liked the idea that everybody was going to get killed on this planet, and, you know, and that's how I was raised. It was kind of an abusive type of relationship because it was everything for the society and really nothing for the family.
Yeah, that's a pretty common occurrence, and I was raised in as well from when I was about 3 years old, so I can understand that upbringing to an extent. Now, you've both been Jehovah's Witnesses for a good number of years then, and during the time, reopened mind that you were a witness, you considered yourself a true believer?
Oh, yes, absolutely, especially at the beginning. I was really gung-ho. I did all the studying, made all the meetings. I even did extra studying, and I was kind of perplexed why Totally ABD didn't, because I guess he probably had enough of it by the time we got married. But, yeah, I was a study. I was a real studious one.
Okay, and what sort of duties or things they call privileges did you have in the congregation? Did you pioneer or anything like that?
Well, being a sister, that kind of limits your privileges, as they call it. But, yes, I auxiliary pioneered for 2 years, and I regular pioneered for 2 years. And Totally ABD was an elder, so some consider that a privilege or a position in the congregation. I never thought too much of it, but we kind of joked with the other elders' wives that we joined the Widows Club because our husbands were always gone on their duties. So.
Yeah, it's really the privilege is kind of a loaded language word that the organization uses, in my opinion, to kind of mask the fact that basically you're providing free labor. So at the time, you're a fully engaged, true believing Jehovah's Witness. And now looking back, though, can you recall maybe some of the things that might not have just sat right with you? Were there any sources of cognitive dissonance that you had to, say, place on the shelf and wait on Jehovah in order to remain faithful during that time?
There were two things that stood out from me, even when I was a study. And I didn't like the fact that the women weren't allowed to have certain duties in the congregation. I mean, I kind of understood the elder part, but ministerial servant duties, that was really nothing more than just helping with things in the congregation. It wasn't a teaching position at all. And then the other thing too was, as a real gung-ho witness, I understood the need to preach, because if it was a really important message, everybody needed to hear it. But what bothered me was that what about the people in China? What about the people in India? What about the unborn children that never got to hear? Or even people in this country that even didn't have much of a chance to really make an informed decision. That kind of bothered me a lot. So, I was thinking, if God was a God of love and justice and mercy and power, why couldn't he make it so that all of his children could hear the message and make a decision? That bothered me for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think all witnesses have a section of their mind that they've cordoned off, so to speak, sort of a storage bin where they put all of those doubts, those questions, those Watchtower doctrines that either make no sense or are just unbelievable or that interfere with their right to mental and emotional autonomy. So all of those are locked away by a couple of key phrases that they use all the time, like, where else would we go? Which we know is a misquote and misapplication of a scripture. And they also keep telling themselves, and we also kept telling ourselves, wait on Jehovah. Now, some witnesses keep that stuff locked away for decades, some for their entire life. But at some point, for many of us, there's a particular event. Was there any particular event or a new doctrine or something that happened in your congregation that, say, broke the lock on that storage bin, so to speak? Something that caused you to allow yourself to start investigating and to question the authority of the Watchtower leaders?
Yes, I can point to one very specific thing, and that was when there was an article in the Gainesville, Florida Sun about blood and Jehovah's Witnesses. And I read that article, and there was a website, AJWRB, or the Associated Jehovah's Witnesses for the Reform of Blood. And I looked at that website, and I read it, and I read it, and it started making sense, especially the letters on there by a person calling himself Lee Elder, and also the replies that was up there from the Watchtower Society itself. They made no sense at all. But the thing, this particular article, started me changing my mind totally about the blood policy. Because you see, when our youngest son was born, back in 1982, this was before the AIDS was known by the general public. I believe the medical community knew something about it then. And of course, this was also before there was any hospital liaison committees. When our son was born, the head of the pediatric intensive care unit came to me as I was coming out from under anesthesia and told us that if I didn't allow my son to have a blood transfusion, that he wouldn't live the day out. Well, we were totally absorbed in the religion then, and so we both absolutely said absolutely not. Well, our son did live. He'll be 20. He was 29 this year, but for me to turn around and change my ideas on the blood, because it made a lot of sense to me to not take blood, but now seeing they're changing to allowable blood fractions, and I've read the part on how they allowed certain things for hemophiliacs even a long, long time ago. Of course, I learned that on the website, not from them, of course. So, yes, that really started me looking, and then, of course, that led to other sites, JWD, which is now JWN, Silent Lambs, JW Facts, and a lot of others. When I started looking at the evidence that these websites presented, their references were impeccable. Not only that, but they gave actual scans from their references, so I didn't have to think, oh, can I have to go to the library and look this up or anything? It was right there in front of me. All the research was right there. Yeah, or were they just lying? Were they taking it out of context? And you could see that it was not out of context. And then when I started seeing how the Watchtower had pulled things out of context, and it was actually the opposite of what the original authors intended, things just started falling apart. It just became a domino effect for me.
I think with me, and it seems kind of funny, I did some temp work up at Bethel. I think it was back in '04 and '05. And when I was there, now here I am an elder, I was presiding overseer at the time. I'm walking around in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm seeing all these buildings they owned. And the buildings weren't being used for anything but just to house Bethelites. And the Bethelites were there just to maintain the buildings. I'm looking at that and I'm going, this don't make no sense. Because, years ago they had the factory there and they had this and they had that. And they were bragging about, I think at the Adams buildings, they had a real nice gymnasium there. They were bragging about how expensive the floor was that they put down. And, of course, but there was nothing else going on there. Of course, they had the world headquarters there, the offices. There was some things taking place there, but really a lot of buildings were just there for people to live in so they could maintain them. Of course, now we know what's been taking place there, and we realize that. That was like the first little kink in the armor for me. And later on, well, because of the abuse I went through as a child, I was physically abused by an elder to the point he almost killed me, and I don't know if it was sexual. I was very young at the time. I was 7, 8 years old. And, well, anyway, as you get older, you kind of block all that out as a kid. Well, as you get older, it does a lot of harm to your body. I was fighting depression, something terrible. I ended up going to a psychiatrist, a psychologist. Psychologist ended up to be a witness, and that witness made me sign a form that if I brought out anything that was disfellowshipable, she was going to go to the elders about it. Well, wow. I thought that was kind of strange, but I was so depressed I signed anything. Well, funny thing was, turned out you know, through my therapy, I got through a lot of things. Then I got on Ritalin because I suffer with ADD real bad, all my life, I guess. Didn't realize it until I was in my 50s. Well, boy, when I took that, that started waking me up. My first big question was, you know what? No way, flood don't make any sense. And when I mentioned that, well, that's when Reopened Mind, she started feeding me information that she was already getting off of the internet, and then one thing led to another.
Well, I said, let me research this for you, dear.
Yeah.
So first I presented him all the scientific evidence that I could find about it, and then I let him in on some of the websites, and finally one day he came to me and he said, where are you hiding that book, Crisis of Conscience? And I said, I don't have it. He said, well, order it.
Yeah.
So we did.
Yeah, and that was our first book, and one thing led to another. Now, going to what Reopened Mind said was very true. When I started reading JWN, I went in there very suspicious at first because, after all, all the indoctrination, Satan's tool it was, and I was scared, very scared. Well, as an elder, I've had many, many years of experience. I was an elder for almost 25 years, and when I started seeing the stuff they started talking about, it brought back, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, oh gosh, I forgot all about that. You know, just one thing after another, and because of that, it convinced me that what was being brought out there was very true.
I think one of the most impressive things about Ray's book was his attitude. He was very, very humble, very slow to blame anything. It was always a problem with the concept itself and with the way things were done, but really never with the people. And his humility, it wasn't the person who was venting or angry. It was just, here it is, this is what happened, and
yeah.
It was very, that was one of the best books to read, first books to read for an exiting witness.
We're reading it again right now.
Yeah, actually, I'm reading it again right now as well. I'm almost to the end at this point. I'm in the part where he took a little bit of a leave of absence, and then basically everything started hitting the fan back in Brooklyn, and he had to go back. So that's where I am in the book. And yeah, Ray Fran's Crisis of Conscience really is a good first book. And as Totally ADD mentioned, some of these online message boards are really good to help you process through when you're working your way through some things. But I tend to not recommend a message board like JWN as a first stop because I recall for myself, it is that indoctrinated fear of the world and of worldly viewpoints and things that you mentioned. I recall maybe 5 or 6 years before I really started exploring and studying to get out of the organization, I had visited JWN. I spent maybe a half hour there, and that was enough to scare me off for, like I said, another 5 or 6 years. So I tend to not recommend the message board as a first step, but I would certainly recommend Ray Franz's book as a first step, and perhaps maybe one of the more recovery-oriented message boards as a first step. JWN I like to describe as sort of the Wild West of internet discussion, and there are a lot more soft landing points there on the internet that you can go through, and more informational things that, like Reopened Mind discovered on, like AJWRB is a great site if you're interested in the blood doctrine, or Silent Lambs for the pedophile cover-ups, or JW Facts for basically everything. So there's a lot of great internet sites, and I love JWN. It is kind of my internet home now, but it can be very scary for someone who's still a believer. Now, we've been talking about what you might call the straw that broke the camel's back, and people often tend to focus on that last straw or the trigger event that starts someone on the path out of the Watchtower, and that's what we've been just talking about, and I think it's an important thing to discuss. But my question to you now is, if you hadn't already had somewhat of a storehouse of other things in the back of your mind, cognitive dissonance issues that were stashed away and piling up. If you hadn't had all of those things, like the misogyny of the organization, or the fact that there really are no witnesses in India or China, those sorts of things, would just that article say that you read in the paper in Florida have been enough to get you on the road, or do you think it was a kind of a compilation of all the events of your life?
I had to say that article would not have been enough because of the way I felt before regarding blood. But it does take a lot of things, and it does take a lot of time, because I researched for a long time. I studied for a long time coming into the organization, and so I also took some time coming out of the organization. But of course, by the time I came out, I had a lot more life experience behind me, so that helped too.
Yeah, I think another thing that really helped us a lot, we ended up in a congregation that was, I guess, the epitome of a no-love congregation. It was one of the most loveless places we were ever at in our life. And one of the reasons was we had, on our body of elders, we had several elders that were feuding. And I have witnessed personally almost fist fights between two elders at elders meetings. And one of them was an ex-CO. And he was really the big problem. And, you know, that and, well, just other things. I tell you, that Watchtower on not holding hands during prayer because somebody might think you're having some sexual interest with somebody. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing on the planet Earth. But Reopen Mind and I both would hold our hands in kind of like protest after we saw that Watchtower article. And then, of course, then finally the overlapping generation. I know the last elder school I ever went to, they did like a little pep rally thing at the end of it. They had I don't know who the guy was from Bethel who was the instructor, but he basically says, "Do you all believe in the faithful and discreet slave class?" And man, every elder almost stood up and they started cheering and clapping and da-da-da-da-da like that. And I just looked around and I got a chills down my spine. I go, "Oh my God." I says, they're putting so much prominence on men when they're supposed to be doing it with Christ, at least Jehovah God, but they weren't even doing that. They were really putting these guys on a pedestal. And I says, oh boy. And well, I think, what was it, about a month later, I stepped down as an elder. And but that scared me. There was a lot of little things, just not one, but it just, you know, just one thing after another. And you're right about JWN. I remember the first time I went on it, there was a couple of people there. I mean, I love them now. I understand what they're saying, what they're doing, but boy, they scared me to death. But I can see where there would be a better site for new ones than that one.
Yeah.
Well, we have come out of such a homogeneous organization that to go to a place like JWN where there's all kinds of different ideas and thoughts and emotions put out there. We were not allowed to put out our emotions. We were not allowed to say our thoughts openly. Totally ADD and I would come home and we would discuss certain things between us, but we knew that we couldn't go and say it around to different ones in the congregation. So it's a new experience, this free-for-all conversation, and I find it very refreshing myself. Yeah,
it really is a new way of thinking for one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I participate also in an ex-Jehovah's Witness recovery group on Facebook, and very often someone will have perhaps not left the organization over for their own conscious decision like you have and my wife and I have, but maybe they got disfellowshipped for something. They made a mistake, or what the organization considers a mistake, and they got disfellowshipped, and so they come to this recovery site with the mindset that the still Jehovah's Witness mindset, because they haven't done all the research that we did. They haven't learned that the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower indoctrinated way of thinking is unhealthy, that it's not the way other people, normal people, converse. And so oftentimes they'll show up and say something, and a few people will disagree with them, even politely, because this particular site I'm talking about is very supportive. But any even polite disagreement oftentimes will totally freak some people out, especially newly disfellowshipped ones. And they'll say, I can't put up with this. I can't put up with this persecution. And they'll even reflect the same sort of persecution complex that witnesses do. So there's a lot of different places that for different people in different stages of recovery and exiting from the organization. And I'm glad you both are bringing out the fact that there is oftentimes a last straw, but before that there is a lot of other straw being piled up, and it's a accumulation of a lifetime of things. And I think that's important for all of us to remember, because anytime we're speaking with current Jehovah's Witness relatives or friends that aren't yet shunning us, that we should definitely try to perhaps add to that cognitive dissonance by asking questions. You know, sometimes you hear people say, well, they're indoctrinated, you're wasting your time even trying with them, there's nothing you can say that can get somebody to leave. But I think that viewpoint really misses the point, because even though one key event or doctrine gets people to start on that path to leaving, it is this accumulation of things that often gets people out. So if we can add to the accumulation, maybe what we say isn't the last straw. But that doesn't mean what we say to them is not helping them build something up in their mind for the future. Now, most of us have people that we love and we care about, that when we start researching and learning the truth about the Watchtower organization, that we would love to have come along with us and accompany us on this journey, this freedom of thought, emotion, and behavior, our learning how to think autonomously. And so many times, for instance, on JWN, we'll read somebody's heartbreaking story about how their exit from the Watchtower and from Jehovah's Witnesses has ruined their marriage or broken up their family. And it's really tragic that an indoctrinated witness would choose his or her religion over his or her family member. And this really brings to mind, to me right now, the Watchtower's public propaganda magazine called The Awake of July 2009 said, and this is a quote, "No one should be forced to worship in a way that he finds unacceptable or be made to choose between his beliefs and his family." Well, of course, we know that they apply that information to the public who are considering joining the witnesses, and obviously and rightly will be opposed by their normal family members. But Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed not to apply that sort of viewpoint to themselves and their own family who refuse to join the witnesses or are witnesses and want to leave. So it's a challenging situation once we start down that path of self-discovery and Watchtower discovery. And it's especially challenging to bring our loved ones along the path with us. So, Reopened Mind, from our conversation so far, it sounds like you started discovering and researching a little bit before Totally ADD did. So when you found out, for instance, about AJWRB, the website on blood, and you found out that there was a serious problem and that the governing body and the Watchtower leadership was basically wrong about this very important doctrine, were you a little bit concerned that Totally ADD might not see things the same way?
Well, I don't really know. I knew that I was just going to keep quiet about it and just research more and get it more established in my own mind before I brought anything up to him. But then too, when he did open the door, that was really great. That was just so good. And I knew that
you were a little bit worried.
I was worried what you were going to say and how you're going to feel about it. But I knew that I listened for what he was thinking and what his concerns were, and I built on those rather than trying to just throw something out that was my concern. And I think that's probably more important to listen to what the other person is concerned about And then when that door is open just a little bit, then you can start adding your own concerns, maybe with some questions rather than dogma, because you've been getting so much dogma already. You've just had enough of it crammed down your throat.
And it really was a turbulent time in our life at that point. I was right in the middle of going through therapy, and when you go through therapy, there's a lot of crap that comes up, and she was helping me deal with it. She was my sounding board, and she just listened. She put up with my crap all through that and all through the years of my depression. And then along with that, dealing with that emotional upheaval, and then trying to stabilize, and then starting to discover these things. Well, in a lot of ways, that's another upheaval in our life. And and then in all that, I mean, we lost parents during that time. We lost a very dear friend during that time, and
he means in death.
In death,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot. I mean, if you were with us for those several years, we went through all that. Man, it was like missiles being shot at us from every direction, And you would think that would draw us closer to the organization, but it really didn't, because we just didn't see the love there, especially in the congregation we were at. And then finally, too, even the other congregation we were from, which was considered a more loving congregation, some individual came to visit us and found out I was going through therapy, and man, that person got so upset, they basically said that I was worshiping Satan himself doing something like that. Just thought that was horrible, that I would even consider that, and left our house in a huff. And we couldn't believe it. And we haven't spoken to that person since, but, we start seeing this stuff, and Barbara, reopened my eyes, just were not getting the support from anybody. And I think that was, just another factor. With us, it's kind of complicated. Not only learning it, but just all these other little things that were hitting us all at once. And we're finally, the move we made has finally stabilized quite a bit, actually.
Well, we also have 2 adult boys who are married and whom we raised in the organization. And we have taken both of them aside and told them what we were doing, and they're in total agreement with us. The one is out himself, but the other one, due to his wife's family, is kind of trapped, and he knows it. And I really feel bad for him, but that's his situation. And
we got grandchildren.
And then there's grandchildren too that are involved. So unfortunately that's kind of where we are. And just for the record, neither one of us have been disfellowshipped, nor have we formally disassociated ourselves from the organization at this point.
Okay. And my wife and I are in the same situation. We're technically merely just inactive, even though we are out and have no intention of ever going back. And it's interesting to hear you talk about your son and his wife and their situation. And I think that he has a good pair of role models in the two of you, in the way that you've worked together and helped one another, that there is hope for him and his wife, that someday that they can see the light. I mean, I feel like this organization has been treading water, spinning its wheels, however you want to call it, for a long time. It is not a progressive organization, and as time goes on, everybody is very, very tired that's on the inside. My wife mentioned to me the other day she ran across a young man at the grocery store from the congregation. I think he's around 20 years old. The prime of his life, the bloom of youth. And she said that he was just kind of moping his way up and down the aisles, filling up the cart, and she ran up to him smiling and waving, saying, "Hi, how are you? How have you been? Haven't seen you in a while." And he never really brightened up, even throughout their brief conversation, because like Totally ADD used the phrase earlier, I think, drudgery. It's a drudgery in there. And so hopefully there's going to be hope for your son and his wife, and congratulations on your other son for being out as well. Now, you mentioned that you took you kept an reopened mind on Totally ADD to see signs for when you might be able to say something or ask a question or share something based on when he was ready. What were some of the clues maybe that Totally ADD gave that made you feel, okay, I think I can slip this in here now, or I think I can ask him about this now? Were there any experiences you can remember along that line?
Well, I think the big thing with me was the pedophile problem in the congregation itself. And I remember even before we were really talking to each other about leaving or anything, that I would say to him, you know, so-and-so, shouldn't you call the police? You know, he was an elder, and I kind of knew what was going on, but I was totally out of the loop. But I say, shouldn't you call the police? Oh, no, I've got to call Bethel Legal first. That's the first place I have to call. And I'm saying, well, shouldn't they at least be disfellowship? No, we don't have two witnesses. We don't have enough proof, and on and on. And I'm saying, well, who's going to be a witness to this kind of thing? As it turns out, through his therapy, Totally ADD was able to recall his own abuse as a child, and both of our daughters-in-law have been victims of pedophiles within the organization.
One was a PO.
And one of them was a PO, and it was a notorious, that one was in the newspaper when that happened.
Early 90s.
Yeah, and that was in the early 90s. And that was one of the big things that bothered me, was the pedophile, and I would just keep pounding him with that once in a while, and until I finally broke him down a little bit, and then he started to see that. The thing that really got him started, though, was him wanting to research the flood. So when I started researching the flood, and I thought, oh boy, not only can I say to him, you know, lead him to not out of being a witness, I'm thinking, you know, here he is looking at something that's more towards not even being a Christian or believing in the Bible. And to me, that was kind of exciting, because that's where I came from before. I was agnostic before, and I knew where I was going back to. But he did not really have any point of reference other than being a witness. So to him, it was a whole new way of exploring things and a whole new way of looking at things. And so we started talking about celebrating the holidays and birthdays. We celebrate our birthdays now, and we get either of our boys alone, we give them a little birthday cake or something, even though it's not their birthday per se. So that's brought us closer together, really, because now we have more of a freedom to talk with each other about these things, whereas before we kind of dancing around each other. I danced around him a lot, and his ADD was a big part of that, not just the organization. So I mean,
yeah. When I finally started getting on medicine, and between the therapy and the medication, our lives changed a lot, because yeah, like they says, it's not you, it's not me, it's ADD. You know, that's really true, because it can mess up a relationship in ways people just don't get, because it's just a frustration that's taking place with each individual. But yeah, like she said, the flood was the thing, and when I finally realized that, well, this makes no sense, there's no way this could have happened. And I would always draw on her scientific background, because she always had a very scientific background. That's the other thing she always resented from day one, from the time we were married, back in the mid-'70s onward. She's educated, and she knows a lot of the brothers were not educated. And she would always catch them in not pronouncing words right, were not proper English, or the scientific facts were incorrect, and that used to just bug her to death. And I don't blame her, because it just was not accurate.
Yeah, the flood is really a kind of a cut and dried sort of thing. It's not one of these things that like the origin of life, abiogenesis. Well, nobody was there, nobody really knows. Well, we've got enough geology and science and just common sense that the flood could not have been a worldwide flood. There may have been a regional flood at some time. Of course there were. There are regional floods in every region at various times. But the whole water canopy baloney that the organization tries to sell, obviously it never happens. And, you bring up a good point about the organization, that to be an elder and to be on the platform giving talks and instructing, even on topics that touch on archaeology and geology and the other sciences, biology and things such as that, the organization, the Watchtower, doesn't require any kind of education other than you being able to follow their outline and parrot what they tell you. Whereas any female in the organization, like Reopen Mind, she could have had a master's degree or a PhD in archaeology and geology of that period, and she'd still never have the opportunity to be on the platform and give a talk on that, for the sole reason because she's a woman. And so that's one of my issues with the organization as well, which may seem odd since I'm not a woman, I'm a man, but misogyny really bugs me. So that's really one of my pet issues. So I'm kind of glad that you brought that up, Reopen Mind, this evening.
Well, fair is fair.
And another thing you mentioned was how when you first start on this path of research, you're not really researching in order to leave the organization. I mean, that's not the goal. You get to a point while you're researching when you realize that this organization doesn't... Well, let me ask instead. Since you start your research not looking to leave the organization, at some point, how do you know that, well, this is the path we're on, we're going to end up leaving? How did you guys know?
Well, when I really started researching, I think the first big shock to me was learning that the Watchtower was an NGO, part of the UN. And we had studied for years. How many times did we study the Revelation book? And then even before then, the Finnish Mystery book and the Babylon the Great book, where they demonized the United Nations. And yet here they are for a decade, they were members of it. And when I saw not just somebody saying it, but when I saw the letters from the UN and when I saw that what they required to be an NGO, then I just got so disgusted. And then one thing led to another, and then the letters that, who was it? Was it Rutherford or Nor? It was Nor, sent to Hitler, and he said that, he supported the German government. Rutherford, okay. I guess it had to be Rutherford. And on and on, and the situation in Mexico versus Malawi, we wrote letters to Malawi at that time. We were in the organization then. We wrote the letters.
Yeah.
And
but we remember when we were younger, there was an announcement made at the hall about that thing that went on in Mexico, not to really pay attention to it, and what they did was correct, and da-da-da-da-da. That was back in the 70s. There was a letter read in the hall. And, the funny thing was, it just didn't register, but now it does. It all, it all comes together. All the pieces fall together, so, yeah.
And then when I started reading about Barbara Anderson, and she's my hero, really, because she was right there in Bethel, and she was asked to do some research, and she started digging and going into all the old files and finding the files and finding the concern. She was reading the letters that were being sent in from women who had been abused, and it touched her so much, and she was so brave to go on Dateline. And of course we were too indoctrinated at the time. We did not see the Dateline program. I've never seen it, but just the fact that all of these things coming together. And when you put the pieces of the puzzle together and you, as they keep saying, pull back the curtain on the men behind the curtain, and see that they're just men and they're making stuff up, and
Yeah.
and they really, there are a lot of women in the organization. There's women that I have known that are very intelligent, that have had degrees, and were far better than a lot of the elders that were taking the lead in the congregation at the time. And to me, I think women, by and large, are better teachers just because we're more patient and we don't have it people.
She taught me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's really the indoctrination that the organization uses, the BITE sort of mind control that Steve Hassan lays out in his book, Combating Cult Mind Control. It really, really works. And it seems to really, really work with women. You mentioned you have a couple of in-laws, family members, who have been victims of pedophile from the organization. I have a family member who was a victim of pedophile in the organization as a small child. And she is one of the most fanatical witnesses I know. She shuns me just for being inactive. And so it really shows how strong the indoctrination can be, and how it really takes a lot of work, a lot of support to really break free of that. And so all the different things you've brought out that you discovered, that you learned about, that all added up together to finally build that puzzle and paint that picture of the organization, the accurate picture, instead of the one that they present. And like Totally ADD explained about how just a simple letter from headquarters read out at the service meeting is enough to quash the questions. It justifies what they're doing, and the audience accepts it. I remember there was a letter read in the congregation prior to the Dateline that Barbara Anderson was on, telling the congregation not to watch it, and that it was there was going to be some apostates on television, and don't watch the apostates. So it really shows how the indoctrination works. But what you two show our audience is that you can sort of get out on your own, but you can also get out of the organization and break free from the mind control together by supporting one another. So each of you, if you could in turn if you could sum up a plan of action that you could recommend to an existing Jehovah's Witness who is discovering these things right now and who wants to maybe help their loved ones, their spouse, brother or a sister, along with them on the path to freedom, could you summarize, perhaps, in just a brief answer, a plan of action that you might recommend for those who are in that situation?
2 books come to mind. Crisis of Conscience, as we've already mentioned, and Steve Hassan's Combating Cult Mind Control is an excellent one, especially because it does not mention Jehovah's Witnesses in that one. I know he does in his second one, but it lets the reader compare for themselves where they are and what's going on, whether they see it or not. And I especially like Steve Hassan because being a convert, I beat myself up over why did I let myself get into this? Why didn't I research this before I came in? Well, there wasn't an internet. I can kind of let myself off the hook a little bit like that, but still, why? What drew me? And he said that the recruiters really, they go after the brighter ones, the ones that they want to draw into the organization, although lately it seems like there's a lot of emotional problems coming into the organization, but nevertheless, it really shows you're in a certain emotional place to come in, and I think you're also in a certain emotional state to be able to go out. So I think that sums it up.
Yeah, when I think about it, those two books are excellent. I also think about the fact that, you know, when we were in the organization, especially when you're studying with somebody, you always say, well, prove it. Prove it to yourself. Prove that what we are saying is correct or not correct. Well, this is what I would encourage those also to do who are trying to get out. Prove it to yourself that what is being said, such as on JWN or in these books they read, or other sites that you may read, prove it to yourself that what these people are saying are true, and they're just not making up some kind of lie. That's one of the things that, you know, I brought out earlier that really impressed me was when I started listening to what other people were commenting on these websites, it brought up memories of things I totally forgot from many years ago. And I go, oh, yeah, I remember that. I remember the one thing was disfellowshipping if a married couple has oral sex. And I forgot all about that. And I got thinking about, oh, my God. And then I got thinking, oh, those poor people that were, you know, disfellowshipped for doing something like that. You know, how they destroyed their lives. I know it ended up in divorces and other things. And I go, oh, my, I forgot all about that. And it's strange how, you know, you can live it for so many years and you just kind of like, I don't know, you take it for granted or you just don't think about what's taking place. But when you finally do start waking up, you know, start looking into all those things. Really investigate it, because I think what you're going to find is, well, just like I said many, many times now, I say it on the JWN all the time, that's totally ADD, and it took a long time for me to bring that word out, and that's the big C word, and that's cult. Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult. And as soon as you realize that, and you know, and it takes time for you to realize that, the healing begins.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It really is, with both of you, the books, Crisis of Conscience, Combating Cult Mind Control, are excellent. Steve Hassan's awesome. And also to really research and to find proof, because really Jehovah's Witnesses who are active and are true believers only search for proof in their own Watchtower publications, and that's not enough. They're programmed to, you may look at the comments on some of the YouTube videos that some of the former witnesses make, and you can tell when a witness comments because he or she instantly just starts saying, well, that's a bunch of lies, that's not true, you're an apostate, you're criticizing the Watchtower and making things up. Well, obviously that person has been indoctrinated and programmed to say those things and has not done the research, because when you do the research, you find that most of the flaws that you see on the internet that are critical of the Watchtower are true. There are some loons who do make some stuff up, but they're really in the minority. They're not typical of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. They're a fringe of ex-witnesses, just like there's fringes within the witnesses. And it's something you mentioned, Reopen Mind, about how Steve Hassan explains that cults tend to try to recruit more intelligent, more ambitious, more hardworking people, and that the Watchtower seems to be getting away from that a little bit. And I think I've noticed that as well with the simplified versions of so many of the new literature releases. The brochures and the books and the Watchtower magazine itself now all have a simplified version, whereas their regular version is only written at a 5th or 6th grade level. So the simplified version, you're looking at kindergarten level writings. And so that doesn't make them not a cult, because they still behave in all the cult behaviors. But I think with the advent of the information age and Combating Cult Mind Control, I believe was written in 88 or 89, which is pre-internet, or at least before the public in general had the internet. And now that we're in the information age, I think that the Watchtower is running scared of the internet, and they're running scared of the websites that we've mentioned, and of talk shows like Cult Free Radio, because of the information is so much more readily available. And so they're wanting people who don't read, who don't research, who don't have the inclination to read or research. But I think my observation, and you can tell me if you agree or not, is that it really is affecting the congregations, because they're getting fewer and fewer qualified people to do even the simplest of things, like deliver a half-hour public talk, or conduct a 1-hour Watchtower study, or work up a 20-minute service meeting part. And we're ending up with congregations that have only 3 or 4 elders that can really do those things, and maybe 1 or 2 that can do them well. Has that been your observation as well?
Well, on the last congregation that we were in, one of my pet peeves was the Watchtower conductor. The man was a terrific man. He had a heart as big as the state we were in, and yet he was semi-literate, and he was the Watchtower conductor. And he would get up and he would use horrible English. He would use terms that even Watchtower language terms from 20, 30 years ago, like bat calls and things like that.
He couldn't even pronounce the
and he couldn't pronounce the words correctly, and he didn't understand the questions that he was asking. When he would read a question, he wouldn't understand whether he got the right answer or not.
Yeah, I know in the last elder school I attended, they're very worried that there are not men who are stepping up to become servants or elders in the Kingdom Hall. They gave the elders statistics, and I mean, we're talking about last year was the last school I ever went to before I stepped down. And really, we got half, in this country, they almost got half the amount of ministerial service that they had 20 years ago, in the early 90s. They almost got half the amount of elders. They got a little bit more than half. I think they got about, they have about a third to 40% less elders than what they had 20 years ago. So the men aren't there, and they're worried about it, and they're trying to get these other men to step up. But I know, talking to a lot of these other men, they wanted no part of it because of the burden and the responsibilities they were throwing on the servants and the elders. And it is quite a burden. I mean, I've never been so relieved in my life I don't have to go through that anymore. It was just unbelievable. I always loved it. Every month we get 1 or 2 letters from the society, and they would always say, "We don't want to put any more burden on you, elders, but." Yeah, you know, and I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, right." You know, they just put another load on us. And I tell you, I have a lot of sympathy for, you know, these men that know what the truth is about the truth, who are, you know, trying to find a way out, but are still serving as elders. I don't know how they do it. I just don't know how they do it, because it's just so much. It's just so much now. They're throwing a lot of burden, and of course I also saw the handwriting on the wall when they started the society about 2 years ago. Now they got their names on the bank accounts of the congregations. They use it as a guise. Well, it's going to be simpler for you to send the money up to us, but now they got their name on the accounts, and I thought that was very suspicious. And you know, now I've heard about the RBC, how all the members. I was talking to this brother a few months back, and he's still active with the RBC. All the RBC members are now connected to the website with the society, so the society can contact them, or you know, find out where they're at and see if they can use them. And they're going away from Bethelite work now just to use temp workers so they can save money. On and on and on and on. I really see it now. It's really a business. They're making money by what they're doing. And but anyway, I digress. But
yeah,
you know,
it really is true that the organization is like any other organization, about perpetuating itself and continuing to make a profit to continue to pay the bills and to be able to support the leaders. And so it really is true what you say. Well, now that you're both out, inactive, and with no real intention of returning, and you've moved to a new state so that you're not likely to be harassed by the elders, how do you feel? What sort of things are you doing together now that you probably didn't have time for back when you were an elder and when you were both busy serving the organization? I know for my wife and I, our marriage has never been stronger in more than 20 years. How are things going for you? What are you enjoying doing nowadays?
Medication helps a lot. We are planning on opening a business here in our new location, and we will be working together on that. We remodeled a house together. That was his profession before for all his life. So we remodeled a house together. We're
really.
What else do we do?
We're boring people.
We are boring.
We're boring people. No, I agree with the marriage part. Our marriage is stronger than ever. We've been married over 37 years, and it's stronger now than ever. Quite frankly, I'm surprised we didn't get divorced the first 5 years, because with the Watchtower dogma and just no support at all from anybody when we were first married in the congregation.
Not to mention our own immaturity.
And our own immaturity, because we got married way too young. I mean, after all, I wanted to have sex before 1975, and that was one of the reasons I got married, and that's not a basis to get married. But I lucked out. I ended up with a wonderful woman, and she stuck by my side, and I always call her my savior, because she saved me from myself, from these disabilities I had to fight all my life. But we do things. We go to festivals together. Tomorrow we're going to do a first. See, she's agnostic. I've never had a chance in my life to investigate anything else. It was a witness for nothing. Well, tomorrow, and I know she's doing it for me, and I'm curious, we're going to go to, there's this pastor that bought something from us at our house that we had for sale. He invited us to their church. Well, it ended up being the church my wife went to when she was a little girl. So we're going there tomorrow for a service just to see what it's like. I've never done that before. So that's going to be something new we're going to do together.
Well, great. You know, it's really cool that when you finally do mentally break free from the chains that the Watchtower puts on its members, you really are able to explore new things, to try new things, even, like you said, just because you haven't had a chance to before. It's not like you're going to suddenly become a Baptist or become anything else. You know, you're just going to be you. And that's really something that we weren't allowed to be as Jehovah's Witnesses. We couldn't really be our own personality. I think about in Combating Cult Mind Control, Steve Hassan talks about the cult personality and the genuine personality. Well, in the Jehovah's Witnesses, they talk about putting on the new personality. And that new personality that organization puts on you is like a cloak or a jacket, sometimes like a straight jacket, that covers up the real you. And so now you're out. You want to go to a church tomorrow? You go to a church tomorrow, you know? I mean, that's what's cool about being free. And if you wake up tomorrow and you want to sleep in because you're saying, well, I just don't feel like getting up, no pressure. Unlike in the organization, you probably, as an elder, had some kind of duty at the hall that you had to force yourself to get up, whether you felt like it or not. And so it really is, it's great to be free, isn't it? And, you know, remodeling a house, that's not boring. It takes a lot of work. I personally, my wife and I, we have an older house that we wish we could remodel, but we're doing a little projects now and then, here and there, the best we can. So congratulations on the move, on the pending business, on the new house. Congratulations on being free and on the success of your marriage. You said 37 years, and that is awesome. So thank you so much for talking with us this evening and spending some time with Cult Free Radio. Are there any final comments you'd like to share with the audience?
I just want the people who are listening to this, you know, if they're starting this struggle, we're in the middle of this struggle. I see it on JWN. There's desperate people there. They don't know which way to turn. Just give yourself the time. I think people sometimes think they can get this problem resolved real quick. And there is no quick answer to this. I remember Randy had a thread on JWN about a half a year ago, and he brought out that usually the length of time you've been in the cult is about how long it's going to take you to finally become clean of the cult mentally. So I wrote back on my post with him, I says, you mean to tell me I've been in it for 50 years, it's going to take me another 50 years to get out? You know, and he said basically, yes, you'll always have something. There'll always be that something, but don't worry about that. You know, make that resolve in yourself that what you're doing is for you, it's right, and you're no longer going to be controlled by a cult type of thinking, you know, and we're all victims of a cult. I like that word. Lady Lee brought that out a few weeks back in her thread. We are victims of a cult. And if you think of it that way and you know yourself as a victim, just give yourself the time to heal. It will come. We're still working on it ourselves.
There's one thing that has helped both of us, and before we made the big move up to here where we are now, I had a cousin and her husband who lived in the same town as us, and we just decided to let them know what it was like to be a Jehovah's Witness. They knew we were witnesses, and let them in on our decision to come out.
They're non-witnesses.
They're non-witnesses. And we just shared our experiences with them, and it was just such a relief to find some support outside the organization for the decision we just made, because for a long time we felt it was just the two of us. Mm. And since we've been up here, we've been very cautious about our past, and we have opened up to two people here, and both have been very, very positive experiences. So that is something that, you know, anybody that's thinking of exiting really needs to think about, is to feel out somebody that they might trust and just kind of let them in on their little secret.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to yourself, just to be able to talk about it with somebody. Like Totally ADD mentioned about going through the therapy for a lot of different things. And my wife and I both had therapy when we were leaving the organization. And I think it really helps just to be able to talk to somebody and to be able to put it into words and articulate it in a way. Our therapist didn't know Jehovah's Witnesses, didn't understand Jehovah's Witnesses, so we had to be able to explain it in a way that he could understand what we were going through. And I find looking back on those sessions, after an hour session, I probably talked for 50 minutes, and the therapist might have talked for 10. And most of those 10, he was just asking questions to get me to talk more. So really, a lot of it is about being able to release some of that from ourselves, to be able to work through it in our mind and to say it, to articulate it, really helps. And it helps the person we're telling, because they're getting a warning or an idea about what the Watchtower cult is like. And like Totally ADD brought out about the patience and no quick answers. You know, what a Jehovah's Witness is used to is, when there is an issue or a problem, a couple of clicks on the Watchtower CD-ROM, find the article you're looking for, read the article, which takes 5 or 10 minutes, and within a half an hour, you have a quick answer in the organization. Well, those are basically just Band-Aid answers that usually either cover up the problem, push aside the problem, tell you not to worry about the problem. But they're at least answers. But in the real world, answers don't work that way. Answers take time. They take time to think through, time to talk through, time to work through, and they take time to research. And so excellent points from both of you. I really appreciate you being with us this evening. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Matt Sweeney. We really appreciate this time that we've had to talk it out. And this really is a form of therapy, too, for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I thought I had. Thanks to both Reopen Mind and her husband, Totally ADD, for doing this interview with me. As you could probably tell, it was pre-recorded, and it was really, really nice to get to know them and to understand how, as a couple, they were able to help one another. Now, Reopen Mind, she, as you heard in the interview, started to research and find things out a little bit ahead of her husband, and she was able to have information ready when he was ready for it. And I think one of the key points that kind of ran as a thread throughout that entire conversation is that patience is very, very important. I know that when we're often told at assemblies and at the service meeting, we're reminded of how, do you remember when you first learned the truth, how excited you were to share this with everybody you've met? You know, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but we're told that all the time. Well, it's the same sort of feeling, I think even more so, when you learn these things about the organization. You're excited, you're upset that you were misled by the cult, and you want your loved ones to be free as well. And so sometimes you rush into a conversation and spill everything that you've learned, and you don't realize, because you haven't really done the research into how the cult mind control works and the automatic defenses that come up, and it can cause a problem. But as Reopen Mind did with her husband, she waited, and she kept learning, and she kept reading, and she was patient until the right moments arose, because the moments will arise. It's just really takes some patience. And next show, which is going to be 2 weeks from now, I will have another interview with a couple who left the organization together, and I will also share a little bit about what I did with my wife and how we managed to get out of the organization together. And a key theme, at least one of them, is patience. It takes time. Even though you're excited, you've got a lot of emotions running high because you've read, say, for instance, Crisis of Conscience, or you've been to a JWRB website and you've become more enlightened about the flaws of the blood doctrine, or you've discovered that the organization covers up pedophilia. These are all very emotionally charged topics that just make you want to share this with the people you care about, but you can't. You can't tell a cult member anything. You have to give them information that they're seeking, or kind of help them to seek information. So we will discuss this a lot more on the next Cult Free Radio show. Thanks again to Reopen Mind and Totally ADD for your interview. There were several websites and books and things mentioned during the interview. On the rebroadcast, when this goes onto YouTube, I'll try to make sure as many of those links as possible get put up as subtitles. Send me a question on Facebook if you missed a website address that you want to get, or a book title. This show will also be available as MP3 on xjw.com, probably before the next show comes up, maybe a week or two. And then YouTube, we'll try to get the YouTubes up as fast as we can. Like I said early on in the show, we've got the first 4 up, and there's show 5, show 6, and this show was Cult Free Radio, show number 7. I thank you all for listening in. Again, thanks to Reopen Mind and Totally ADD, to all of our friends who perhaps have loved ones still in the organization, or worse, I feel for you if you find yourself needing to go to the Kingdom Hall tomorrow. Remember what we discussed early on in the show. This may very well change the way your Jehovah's Witness family and friends and loved ones are treating you if you're inactive or haven't been regularly participating in the Watchtower routine. So just a little heads up on that. Keep your heads up, keep your chin up. There's plenty of us out there. You're not alone. We're working together to make a cult-free world. So thank you, everybody, and good night. This is Mad Sweeney, and I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.